I don't know. I
What
forgot.
do you mean you don't know what you did this week? What did you do for the first time this week?
Well, we didn't do swimming yesterday.
Yeah, we did do swimming. Thank you to Don and Dottie for that. What else did we do?
Oh, God.
Did you go to school this week?
Yes.
For the first time ever?
Yes.
What did you think about it?
It was good.
It was good. Did you learn a lot?
Yeah.
Was it blazing hot outside on the playground? Is there anything else you want to say?
No.
Say hi and bye to everyone?
Hi and bye.
Alright, go ahead and go. Thank you, baby girl.
See you later, Daddy.
See you later, baby. Can you close the door?
Yeah.
Thank you, baby. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to do all of chapter 6 today. As you heard Ava there, she had a good week at school. It was her first week. Mommy and Daddy probably fared less well than what Ava did, but we're glad that she had such a good time. So we're going to cover all of chapter 6 today, and today's going to be a day where we talk about details and focus on details and making sure that when we're working in life, we kind of make sure that we dot the I's and cross the T's. There was actually a quote Pastor Scott did in a sermon a couple weeks ago that I really enjoyed that kind of focuses on details and focus, which is kind of this, to me, falls into the same thread here, where he said the difference between a light bulb and a laser is focus. And I really like that type of quote. It's a really, really good quote. And we're going to talk about that today, especially attention to detail and what we need to do to make sure we pay attention to detail. So, again, we're going to do all of chapter 6. And at the beginning of it, it says, David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000, and he and his men all went to Baalah in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahijah, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahijah was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark, because the ox stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah, and to this day that place is called Perez Uzzah. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me? He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed him and his entire household. Now David was told, The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everyone he has because of the ark of God. So David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and fattened calf. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and sounds of trumpets. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offering and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person, and the whole crowd of Israelites, both men and women, and all the people went to their homes. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, and as any vulgar fellow would. Then David said to Michal, It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone else from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. So, we're going to break it again kind of into 2 parts. So you kind of got 2 things going on here. And we're going to talk about the first part real quickly. And to talk about what happens in the very beginning, we do need to look back and think a little bit about how about the time of Moses and the law of Moses, because that is critical to the beginning here. So the first thing is, remember the Ark of the Covenant. We have not heard about this in a really long time. In fact, if you remember, I think the last time that we really heard in detail about it of any sort, the Philistines had invaded. They had captured the Ark. When they had taken it to their own temples, it had cursed them, and so they had sent it back to Israel on an ox, not even a guided ox, just a cart with an ox pulling it, and it ended up back in the home of Abinadab, and there it stayed. Now, I think the first thing we should note is this sort of seems to fulfill God's prophecy early on, where He told Samuel, they want a king as their God instead of me as their king. And it sort of seems like that kind of rings true here. Here we see the Ark of the Covenant, the throne that God sits on at this time, and what we hear is that it's been set aside for 70 years. That's roughly historically how long of a gap we have between when the Philistines returned it to Abinadab and when we hear about it now. 70 years. So during the time of Saul and during the early part of the reign of David and during all of their various infightings, we don't hear anything about the covenant, the Ark of the Covenant, which sort of means that, and really at this point, they were playing a game of kings and queens and wars, and during this time, they'd made them their gods versus God being their actual God. So in some ways, what God said through Samuel rings true here, that they had set aside God in place of the king. So that's the first thing I just want to note here. Now, the second thing, I said we were talking about the law of Moses. What we see here is when David wants to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, to the city of Zion, there are two small mistakes, or actually I would say big mistakes he makes in the details. Um, the first one is when the ark is traveling, it should be covered. Um, it's not supposed to be in plain view of everyone. Second, it's supposed to be carried through long sticks by people. It's not supposed to be on a cart with an oxen. Now, probably what happened is again, this is a 70-year gap. It may have been that no one, either they didn't have a written history of what the law was, or there's no one that was an expert in it or had read through, here's what you have to do. Um, and also remember, the last time that they saw the Ark of the Covenant travel, it was on a cart. And so maybe they thought that that was the proper method. They just didn't know better. But regardless of what it was, what we see here is we see that there was two critical details with transporting the Ark of the Covenant that they failed at as it relates to the law of Moses. And this is why I talk about it's critically important not just to know the broad stories of God, the broad understandings, but we need to know the details. We need to be in it every day. And it needs to be more than just a cursory broad study. We need to be in the details of God. It's one of the reasons why I like doing these devotionals, not just to give people that are watching online something to read and learn about. I like it because I have to go into the details of this. This is a story I didn't fully know about until I read about this chapter. And so we have to be in the details. We have to be in the Bible every day, and we have to be more than here's my 1 minute devotional. It's got to be devoted, detail oriented, and we got to be in church, and we have to be in lessons, and we really have to be in it. One of the reasons why I like the teen quizzing is because those kids got to know details that a lot of us don't know, and that's critical. That's critical in our walk of life, or else we're going to make a mistake like we see them get ready to make a mistake. So going back to the story, we hear about them taking that the oxen is pulling it, and one of the oxen stumble, and it almost sounds like in some ways when it stumbles, it sort of upsets the cart a little bit, and Uzzah, thinking he's doing a good thing to protect the Ark of the Covenant, puts his hand on it to sort of steady it, just like a lot of us would do, like if we're carrying something and it's about to stumble, or it's on the back of a wagon or something that kind of stumbles on us, we put our hand on it just to kind of breaks it. It's a reflex, right? That's a critical of how quickly it is. But he's not supposed to do it. You're not supposed to touch the Ark of the Covenant and in God's wrath. One, probably because they didn't understand the correct details, and two, because he actually touched the throne of God. Um, he he was immediately killed. And we see David here, and we see that he has anger burning. We don't really, it doesn't say whose anger he has, or who that anger is directed to, but he definitely has an anger. In some ways, frankly, I got a feeling that he's angry at himself, or he frankly should be angry at himself, as he probably should have done a little more research on what he was doing at this time. And so we see this moment where, because of the lack of detail, because of a lack of focus on the details here, We see a really catastrophic event and someone die, and we see it so profound that actually David stops the whole transportation, and they stop and they leave the Ark of the Covenant in another person's house for 3 months. And so I think that is a critical thing to note during this time, is that it's such a big deal that they actually stop it. Now, one more thing as we talk about attention to details and being devoted to the Bible. One other thing, just because I think it's important for our lessons to not only help us in our walk with Christ, but it needs to walk in day-to-day practical. Whenever you're working on something, whenever you're in something, whenever you're a professional, that attention to detail is just as critical. That focus is just as critical. Think about a lawyer, think about a doctor, think of an accountant, as I am. Think about our pastors, especially in the pastors that are in the Nazarene denomination. All of us are required, not only once, we're required to learn a lot of stuff and then prove that we learn it through a certification process, but all of those groups of people and many, many more, engineers as well, we're required to actually keep up our knowledge and skills. We got to stay in the details and update ourselves each year. Every one of us has a group, have a set of requirements called continuing education, where we got to keep sharp about what we're doing, and that's critical. Like I said, not just in the Bible, but it's in daily life. And just think about it: if it's so critical for us as doctors or lawyers or engineers or accountants or pastors or any other profession that has a continuing education requirement, teachers have another continuing education requirement. If it's that critical for us to keep up to date and to keep detail oriented on those, how much more is it for us in our walk with Christ? And so, what should we be doing then? We should be continuing going to learn more lessons, learning more about Christ, being in our own on our own time, reading, listening to teachers, and it's very critical in our walk with Christ. It helps us in the day-to-day living to make sure we keep that detail with God. So now what we see is 3 months later, we see that the person that has held the Ark of the Covenant during this time is prospering. And so David, seeing this, we don't know if it's because they were prospering or whatever reason, he decides to bring it up. Now, the critical thing that we should know is that at this point, they must have figured out some of the mistakes of the first time, because um, what we see is in verse 13, as they're bringing it up the second time, when those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Now, let's forget the sacrifice part, but think of what they're saying. He says, those who were carrying the ark of the Lord. So obviously now they figured out, oh, you can't carry it on an ox cart. You got to carry it uh, with people bringing it up. So it appears that they must have learned their lessons. David did his research, or he had some of his priests or historians to research, and they figured out, oh yeah, when you move this, people have to actually carry it. And what we see here is that, in addition to that, he sacrifices a bull and a calf every 6 steps. That's a lot of people. And now we get to the second part of this entire story. And what we see here is we see, as they're bringing it in, it's a great rejoicing, a sacrifice, festivities. David gives out food, but he's also dancing, and he's dancing before the Lord. And it doesn't matter, what it looks like. David is doing things for the Lord regardless. And what we hear Michal, and if you remember who Michal is David's wife, through Saul. This is the one that he had originally. She helped him escape. And then, once David started fleeing, Saul set her aside, or made her take another husband. Then David again takes her again as he consolidates his kingdom into Israel. We see here she sees this and she's embarrassed by it. And actually calls David out when he comes home after the celebration, when he's going to bless his household. And so a couple things here. One, I would dare say that all of us who are Christians have had times where someone has called us out for something that seems embarrassing, or there's times we ourselves, as we're getting ready to do something for God, feel embarrassed about it. This is sort of kind of the way that Michal does. That's going to happen to us sometimes. It's there are times when our emotions will fight against our faith. There's times when our emotions will help reinforce our faith. But we need to be conscious that can happen, and it happened even here to someone like Michal. Another thing that's likely happening here is Michael being the daughter of Saul, given the fact that Saul didn't really do anything with the Ark of the Covenant, because it was staying with Abinadab this entire time. This likely means that during the time of Saul, the kingdom became very secularized with what a king should be. And so Michael has this image of Saul, her father, and what he was like as a king. And it was probably a very kingly thing where he was God. Because, like I said, it doesn't seem like he had a lot of involvement with the ark. And so Michael has that vision for what David should be. And David has immediately, during this procession, shown a different viewpoint of a king than what Michael did. May have even gave a different viewpoint of what a king's supposed to be like than a lot of the elders and the nobles in Israel thought that he should be. And so, she calls him out for this, and David immediately rebukes her and says, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone else from his house when he appointed me ruler of the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord." Um, it's what he's showing here is that he is following God, unlike what Saul did. And he almost, to me, this sounds like sort of a diss towards Saul, saying, "Listen, it's okay for me to do this. I was chosen over your dad, and there's a reason I was chosen over your dad." Um, and then in verse 22, this is to me prophetic. It says, "I will become even more undignified in this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And what I want to, in some ways, this feels prophetic because if you think about Jesus, the final king of Israel, the final king of the world, who's a direct descendant of David here, what it almost sounds like is everyone else with Jesus had a different opinion of what the king should be, what the Messiah should be at this time. Jesus knew better. And especially when it says, "I will become even more undignified in this." That's what happened to Jesus. David's line will become even more undignified to the eyes of the earth than what even David was doing. Because what they did is they truly betrayed Jesus. They flogged him. They crucified him. They humiliated him in a way that is substantially different than what David's humiliation to some people's. And it says, "But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." One of the things to remember is that very early on, if you think about the first followers of Jesus, it wasn't necessarily the nobles or anything. It was some of the people who were the lowest of the low because they had seen the compassion, the empathy, and the servant attitude of Jesus. And so when we talk about what Jesus did, what he was doing was for all of us, not for the ones that were most powerful. And it sort of seems like David is echoing the same sentiment right here. And then the last phrase we're left with was, "And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death." Now, I think this is critical. What that sort of says is that either one of two things: either she was barren, or maybe she was so out of favor that uh, with David that they didn't sleep together at that point. But the thing that's so critical here is if you think about that marriage between Michal and David, it was a combination of the two dynasties of the house of Saul and the house of David. And in some ways, what is being expressed here is this scripture is almost saying that the line of Saul died with Ishbosheth as a royal line. That David's line will now be supreme, and there won't be any merging of the two lines. It will be his and his only, and that is pretty monumental. Now, later on in another chapter, we will hear about a claim that there is 5 sons of Michal in a later spot that is actually kind of there, and there's some controversy or there's some questions over did she or did she not have any children. What a lot of academics believe is that the 5 sons that they're referring to that were Michal's were actually Merab's, one of the other daughters of Saul's. It was her sons, and that either something happened to her and she passed away, or they were being fostered by Michal. And they believe that those 5 sons may have been foster children of Michal, not actually birth children, which is a nuanced difference, but a difference nonetheless, especially when you're talking about royal lines and ruling through the blood of David's lineage. And so those are kind of critical points just to make. But as we close today, what we see here is two critical things. We see faith, and we see focus. And in the beginning, when we talk about focus, what we need to remember is that we need both faith and focus. But we need the details. We need to do our homework. We need to study. We need to be as well prepared as we can, because the world's going to literally throw anything and everything at us. And if we don't know all the details, if we don't focus on the nuances, if we don't continue to grow and learn and sharpen our skills in the word and in the knowledge, we can still be overwhelmed despite our best efforts. We need to be detail oriented. And then we see faith here. David celebrated, had faith in God, and celebrated in a way that was unrestrained, even if it was considered undignified for a king. But he did. And then what we see is he had faith that he was doing it the right way and the right thing. And then what we see is he even shows that a king of God, should be a servant, and that dignity in the world's view is not really nearly as important as the dignity that we show towards God. And so let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the nice, hot weather that we've had. But thank you for the nice days nonetheless. Thank you for Ava having a good week at school, and for hopefully for all the other children to have a good week at school. Please watch over them and protect them, especially during this time with COVID kind of running pretty heavily through here. Help them to be protected. And please help the teachers to teach them well, to guide them, and to just bring up our kids to be good kids, smart kids, kind kids, because teachers teach way more than just merely academics. Help us as adults. Help us to make sure that our education doesn't stop at the end of our high school or college education, and help us to make sure that, especially in our faith, um, that we stay detail oriented, that we focus on every word that you've given us, and to continue to learn and to focus on what you say. Help us to be prepared for the tough times, and that part of that preparation means having a real devoted, focused effort day in, day out in your word and in lessons between each other. Help us over this week. Watch over us and guide us. Let us do your will. As we get ready for a new ministry, please bless it and let it have great reach in our community, and to bring people to you that may not be with you yet. And we ask for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. But thank you guys. By way of announcements again, Sunday services are 10:45. You're always more welcome to attend in person. We also do everything online through Winfield Nazarene, through YouTube, through Facebook. So there's plenty of ways to watch us online. We will be back here again at 6 o'clock next week. So you are always more than welcome to attend. Thank you guys for watching us tonight, or if you're watching us at another time, thank you for watching us whenever you've clicked to view us. I look forward to seeing you guys again next week, and we'll see you guys